From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Chris. Happy Thursday. Welcome back to Melbourne to the Tower of Talk. We've got lots to get to this evening, including who you think's winner and loser of the week. But as we know, at the beginning of the very end of this political season, we are now getting ready to start to look back at what has happened this year in politics. And one thing that is absolutely clear is that the Prime Minister, while not quite circling the drain, is certainly starting to run out of water in the bath, dare I say, to torture the metaphor. Now, of course, this comes via the polls, which yet again tell us that more than half of the country do not approve of the Prime Minister's leadership. More than half of the country think that things have got financially worse under Labor, and many of those because of Labor. But I'll give you the tip. One of the reasons why the government is struggling and why the government is as desperate and angry and nasty as it is right now, despite just a few months ago, most members of the establishment and access media saying that they'll be there for 2, 3 or as many terms as they want, is something that the rest of the media refuses to look at. And that is how often, how frequently and how clearly this government has been breaking its own promises that it made to the people at the last election. Now, halfway between the last election and the maximum time for the next election, perhaps one of the reasons why 50% of the country has its issues right now with the Prime Minister is because, despite the fact that he made his roll gold promise that cost of living will be lower underneath his government, it is, of course, higher. Now, they will say we deserve a gold star because it's slightly less high than it used to be. Well, guess what? If it's higher than when you inherited it, then it's your problem that will be held in terms of the voters. The other one is, of course, how often the Prime Minister is out of the country. Airbus Albo has stuck. It's stuck because people know that he is in a far better mood, far more enthusiastic when he's out of the country than when he is in the country. And take your pick on the type of issues where the Prime Minister has been each way Albo. Dare I say, all of these monikers, all of these nicknames, all of these things that we've said over the months and now 18 months of the government have all proven to be true. Not via opinion, but via evidence. Like, what about power prices? Here's the each way Albo of things. The promise was $275 will be cut off your power bills. The reality is that they are going up and through the roof. I'll have some more info on that in a second. Of course, the scenario of The Voice, where he said that he would end up respecting what the result was, but the reality was that he's still going to push on with the other 2/3 of the Midnight Oil T-shirt, let alone the $450 million. Now, he says that he has delivered on the promise of more aged care nurses in aged care centres, but there's not one in every centre and they're not there 24/7. And despite the fact that they said that there would be no difference between previous governments and this government when it comes to immigration detention, when it comes to our borders, well, we all know that clueless Claire O'Neill has been the giant difference. Andrew Giles, the Immigration Minister, the giant difference. But if you want to see yet another example of a broken promise and why the government is struggling as it does and why the Prime Minister is sliding by the day, it's because of those broken promises. Now, again, you'll have to send out a search party for other people in the media to actually start noticing these things, but you know it. We've been on the journey all day, every week. That's what we do here in Sky News Primetime, and it's what we specifically do on this program each and every night. Well, you can now add another broken promise. It's not as significant as $275. It's not as significant as lowering the cost of living, but it is a promise nonetheless. This promise.
Integrity and accountability in politics.
Be kinder and gentler.
I think we can all be kinder to each other, frankly, both within the parliament, within our own parties and across the aisle.
Now, do you believe that the kinder, gentler parliament is one where a Labor minister would say this of their political opponents?
We have seen 3 weeks of the most shameless politics I have virtually ever seen played in this parliament. And that included, Speaker, included the opposition's unbelievable action earlier this week, where we brought a proposal to this parliament, the Minister for Immigration brought a proposal to this parliament to strengthen the laws that we passed to criminalise pedophiles loitering near schools. A pretty uncontroversial proposal. But what did they do? They came in and they voted against it. And there was only one reason for that, because they put politics above the safety of the Australian community.
Put simply, the suggestion being that Peter Dutton, the copper from Queensland, the former Home Affairs Minister, who all day, every day was focused particularly on trying to fight the issues of child exploitation, was apparently a protector of pedophiles. This from the very minister who released loathsome characters like child sex offenders from immigration detention, despite the fact that while the High Court made its ruling about indefinite detention, there was plenty of wiggle room in their written judgment to keep most of the 140 people that she let out, including other people who had committed sex offences, to keep them behind bars. But instead, because the beating heart of the Prime Minister is the one that says it can't turn boats around, because the screaming hordes of Twitter, the Channel 9 newspapers and the Turnbull Times, The Guardian, says that any sort of detention system like the one that has worked over the past 20 years is one that must be dismantled. So all of these people came out. So the government, quite rightly, has copped it, and copped it hard, for the past few weeks about its response to that High Court decision. And the idea that they can somehow turn defence into attack by pretending that Peter Dutton is the problem here is something that they took onto breakfast television this morning.
The Home Affairs Minister has accused Peter Dutton of being a protector of pedophiles. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and not only that, but this whole mess that we're facing and trying to clean up now didn't start a couple of weeks ago when the High Court decision was handed down. It started a couple of years ago when Peter Dutton was the minister responsible and made a decision to allow NZYQ to apply for a visa instead of deporting him.
Now, my good friend and colleague Peter Credlin has already laid out in chapter and verse why that spin is garbage. But these are the same people who simultaneously say kinder, gentler, nicer politics, who want to engage with the Teals about truth in advertising, but are exactly the same people as the same people who lied that the Libs were going to sell Medicare. These are the people who now think that the brutal politics that they have played their entire careers is the only way to save themselves. Something that they say in the parliament, that they repeat outside of the parliament, because they know that a politician is not going to sue another politician for what they say in a public debate. But just how low can this government go is not just a question about potentially its polls or an electoral result, but the idea of chasing the lowest road to the highest office comes to mind. What was it that the Prime Minister said about politics in Australia under his watch?
And some people apparently didn't get the memo about the new politics. The new politics is about getting things done and achieving outcomes and working together.
Well, you know, some of the people who really missed the memo? You and your team. For his part, Peter Dutton spoke with Ray Hadley today and rose above the nastiness that they will continue to pursue. Remember, I told you the strategy of this government after The Voice was going to be, when all else fails, get Dutton. Pretend that Dutton is the problem. It's a repeat of the Joe Biden strategy that to this point has been electorally successful in the United States. We'll see if it works in 2024. But it is, regardless of how things have gone backwards as a result of Biden being president, you have to keep voting for him and the Democrats because the Republicans are worse. We saw that when Peter Dutton attempted to point out that the difference between a tick and a cross and how it would count or not count at the referendum, straight away, the people who will do the repeating of the Prime Minister's dirt unit in the media were out there saying that somehow this was an attack on democracy because they desperately want the Australian democracy to be like the American democracy. They want the emperor with no clothes to be able to point at the footy jumper that the other person is wearing. Well, that's not something, again, that, as I say, Peter Dutton is going to be copying, and rightly so.
Well, of course you're impacted by it because it's, the complete opposite of the truth. And I think the government's showing now that they're really getting desperate. So the personal attacks, yes, they hurt, but they don't mean anything to me because it's the complete opposite of who I am or what I believe. And the government going out there saying, oh, he doesn't support this proposal that we've got around pedophiles. Well, actually, we're proposing to make it tougher. I think I am owed an apology from Annika Wells and the Prime Minister, but we'll see if they're big enough to make that apology.
And another thing that we can all see with our own eyes, the each-way elbow, the double standards, the reality of how low they are willing to go to hold on to, as I say, the highest officers in the country. Remember a couple of years ago when the conversation was about what was permissible and not permissible, acceptable and not acceptable behaviour in and around Parliament House. The workplace culture needed to change. In fact, one of the people who did an inquiry into the workplace culture has now been appointed the head of Home Affairs. So you can see that culture was more important than national security in that decision that was made by this government. But this government, again in opposition, and then as the government, promised to walk the talk, that the standards of behaviour that they would bring to the Parliament and to the workplace would set an example to the rest of the country. So could somebody please explain to me why a former Liberal senator by the name of David Van, who has denied but still has been on multiple occasions and in multiple ways accused of inappropriate behaviour in and around the Parliament, that he is now a vote that the Labor Party is willing to seek out to get what it wants out of the Parliament. Rather than being a persona non grata, a person that they wouldn't deal with, a person who they would allow their legislation to fail if it came down to his support, well, guess what? Nothing is too low a road in pursuit of, for the third time I say it, the highest office in the land. When the game is to hold on to power, when the game is to pass legislation that helps your chief political donor, being the union movement, they are willing to go anywhere in the Parliament to get a vote to support it. Because it seems they can't rely on Lambie the way they normally do, and they can't automatically rely upon Pocock in the way that they have now come to assume. But of course, Pocock will become more loyal as the promise goes from the ACT having 2 senators to 4, more Greens, more Teals, more power for the centre-left and the wild left in this country. But the reality is that they are willing to go to a place that if the previous government or any other political stripe decided to go after somebody who had been booted out of their party in disgrace and stays in the Parliament by his own choice, not by the people who ended up bringing him to the Parliament, well, of course, they'd be screaming the walls down. But no such thing. Instead, of course, we learn that he's the potential kingmaker for the industrial relations legislation that benefits, yep, you guessed it, the main political donor to the Labor Party. Now, know you love this. Again, kinder, gentler, newer, fresher, better politics. Now, if the Liberal Party or the National Party or One Nation or the Greens or Jackie Lambie or Palmer or anyone else who's in the Senate was passing legislation that was of direct benefit, not just to a donor, but somebody who has a 50% say in the party constitution, who helps pick their candidates and is their largest source of money, a few people might notice there's something weird here. Well, that is exactly what this government is doing when it comes to supporting what the union movement wants. The union movement is the Labor Party. The Labor Party is the union movement. So we'll pass the laws to protect the union movement. We'll get rid of industry watchdog bodies like the Building and Construction Commission. They'll keep pumping us back full of money. They'll give us the bother boys and girls on the polling stations. Oh, and when we change the laws that cap how much each party can spend in a seat, guess who can spend just as much as a political party? A third-party entity like the union movement. So the union movement literally gets to spend $1 with the Labor Party and $1 on its own, but it's grossly independent. Now remember, Lydia Thorpe had made very specific allegations about David Van and about things that had happened inside the Parliament. And the independent senator, who of course I disagree with on every single issue, kind of has a good point here, which he says it's an absolute disgrace and a sign that the government is desperate for support for its Restoring Our Rivers bill, which of course is the Murray-Darling stuff on top of all of the industrial relations stuff, that they would go to that level and negotiate with Senator Van, who's under sexual harassment investigations, including for assaulting me. He, by the way, is still being investigated by the authorities inside the parliament. Good point from Senator Thorpe. But this is why this government is in trouble, because they think that you are too stupid to notice that they do the opposite of what they promised, that they take care of only the people who advantage them to be able to stay in political power. That despite the fact that they say, because it was such an effective message, particularly with women ages 35 to 55 at the last election, kind of gentler, different, tealy politics, that they can come out and call their political opponent somebody who protects pedophiles. But you notice the kind of gentler teals have had nothing to say about this particular new low in the parliament. Because, of course, they believe that you can do whatever you want to stay under power, because when all else fails, blame Dutton. Pretend Dutton is the problem. Now, of course, back to cost of living, and another issue that I want to bring to your attention here is just about the reality. Not what they say, but what they do is when it comes to the cost of energy transition, something that will cost the best part of $1 trillion. And as we know, the federal government's going to put an extra $60 billion aside, but we'll never know exactly how much money they spent because it's all off budget and commercial in confidence, to get them to the deal that they signed with the UN to get us to 80% renewables by 2030. But of course, the reality of all of that infrastructure that needs to be built is that you will either pay for it, as you are, $60 billion at least in brand new subsidies as taxpayers, or you pay for it with huge increases in inflation that come as a result of higher power bills. And we learned today that a record number of Australians are now struggling to pay their electricity bills and are actually now starting to fall behind. In fact, according to the people who run the energy system, we are now at the highest level in 5 years. I repeat, highest level in 5 years of people who are currently struggling to pay their power bills. Now, of course, one wonderful thing that may well actually be quite helpful when it comes to cost of living is people being able to hold on to more of their money and to be able to spend it on the basics that they want, the basics that they need. Their money, not the government's money. And as we know, there is a plan for the stage 3 of the tax cuts. Now, the stage 3 tax cuts are often dressed up as something that's just for millionaires and billionaires, but as you know, it goes all the way from anyone earning over $80,000 all the way up to, yes, the people who do earn an awful lot more than $80,000. But regardless of whether you're earning $40,000, $100,000, $500,000 or $1 million and above, it's your money. It's not the government's money. It's your money to decide to spend how you wish. So therefore, any opportunity to reduce the tax burden of the country, I well and truly support. And despite the fact that the federal government currently gets the best part of $600 billion in revenue that comes via individuals paying their taxes or companies paying their taxes or royalties, there are those who believe that the government should still be able to hold on to more of your money. And that even though both sides of politics passed a law to say you will get to keep more of your money into the future via these tax cuts, then these tax cuts should not be passed on. And one of the people who believes that is Monique Ryan. Monique Ryan, who represents a pretty wealthy part of Melbourne, is suggesting that giving people access to more of their money and the government not taking that money will somehow explode inflation. Now remember, this is the same logic that was put by the Labor government that turned around and said that a $1,500 tax return guarantee was being taken away from you so they could control inflation. Hang on, it's your money. Now they have an argument if they were turning around and producing a cheque for $1,500, meaning that you would end up with more money than you had before you started working. But a tax cut is not more money. It is the government taking less of your money. You are not ending up with $1 more than you were earning at the time. When the government turns around and just writes a $1,000 cheque on top of everything else, yes, that becomes inflationary. That becomes stimulatory. You holding on to your money, not quite. But perhaps the good doctor says that one of the reasons that the government's got to hold on to as much of your money as possible, the reason that taxes have to stay above $500 billion each and every year, is because, among other things, the government is so great at spending your money. Public servants apparently spend the best part of $100,000 on acknowledgements to country. This information via the digging around of whom we all hope to be the future Indigenous Affairs Minister of the country, the wonderful Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. Now, before we get to our debate tonight, and again, I'd love to know who do you think's winner and loser of the week. Go and find our socials or send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. We are learning something very clearly at the moment, which is how powerless our leaders are choosing to be at a time when we need to draw a line in the sand about what is acceptable and not acceptable behaviour. Now, yes, the state has shown of recent years its ability to go too far. Like, remember their responses to COVID, where the police were deployed to literally tell you where you can and can't walk, where you can and can't sit, where officers on horseback were going around parks and beaches because, God forbid, you were sitting outside, when, of course, even the health officials admitted at the time there was no example of a case being sent from human to human while they were outside. Instead, cops driving around, lights and sirens in the parks. The state has shown us that when they want to crack down, they can crack down. And it was too much. We're trying to scare a bloke from lying in the sun. Remember, of course, in this city, in Melbourne, what they did to people who decided to leave their home when the government said you're not allowed to.
Now, and okay, they're shooting. They're now shooting.
And while all of that was draconian, and there's no suggestion that I think any of that should be deployed again, we have seen in our lifetime when the government wants to do something, they can pull out all the stops to do it. But of course, they are not pulling out many stops, let alone any of the stops that they used when it came to the lockdowns of the past couple of years, when it comes to those who are anti-Israel marching. Now, again, you can have your view about the actions of the Israeli government, you can have your maximum sympathies with the citizens of both of these parts of the world. But at some point, these things quite often tip into an outright hatred of an ethnic minority in our country. We've shown you before that Marine Faruqi paid no price, political or otherwise, for deliberately posing in front of banners with school children at events like this that were saying that keep the world clean, put the Jews in the bin, basically kill the Jews. Now, again, supplement the word Jews for any other racial group or sexuality or gender, and we know what the official state response would be. To ban any and anyone who was near there, to fine the newsagent that sold you the cardboard, and to cancel the person who was holding the camera that took the photo. But we have sadly seen a great gulf between the words of those that have control of our society and the actions of those that are willing to ignore, and the then weakening of the power of the state when they follow up in no way, shape or form when people thumb their nose, or more importantly, put their middle finger up at authority. For example, in New South Wales, after the disgrace that happened at the Opera House on October the 8th, this is what one of the police officers said.
We were better to facilitate that march to the Sydney Opera House. They had a point of destination, undesirable for everyone, how it may have been, but we had no power, if we didn't facilitate that march, to stop people walking down there anyway.
So effectively, green light. We can't control 1,000 people. They couldn't control them on the time, which meant, of course, anything they want to do, including intimidating, driving from the western suburbs of Sydney through to the eastern suburbs of Sydney, very heavily dominated with Jewish people, in intimidation rallies. They even give them a police escort when they do it. And then there's the number of times we heard this in the past week.
School students should be at school during school hours.
We're calling on all teachers that hold a privileged position to teach the curriculum in the classroom.
There's plenty of opportunity to express one's view, but when children go to school, they need to stay in school.
But the reality is, the protests happened, no one got suspended, no one even got a detention. And then there's, of course, what the Prime Minister had to say this time last week here in Melbourne.
As the conflict continues, anti-Semitism is on the rise. but will not let it find as much as a foothold here. Australia will always denounce it and reject it utterly, just as we do all forms of racism and prejudice.
We won't let it get a foothold. People were screaming, gas the Jews, and again, I apologise for the distressing content, but gas the Jews in the forecourt of the Opera House. People have literally been protesting at the front of synagogues in Melbourne. And disgracefully, in the past 24 hours, there have been people who have decided to go after representatives or family members of those that had been kidnapped by Hamas. Again, it happened here in Melbourne. It happened last night. How screwed up are we as a country that this is acceptable? Now, I notice that most of the people who were there, judging on appearance, don't have family connections to Palestine. Instead, they're the same rabble who march against climate change and march for Invasion Day. But you really have lost your moral compass if you think that there is an upper hand in going after the people who are the victims of Hamas. This was not where the Defence Minister of Israel was spending a couple of days. This is where the family members of those who had been kidnapped or killed on October the 7th were. But what will happen? Will any of these people be booted out of the universities that they go to? Will any of them have a week or 2 weeks denied on Centrelink? No. Which does stun me. That we've gone from 2 years ago, the police literally telling you where you could or couldn't lie in the sun, to a scenario now where it seems a certain group of people can say anything, do anything and go anywhere, and to be able to intimidate an ethnic minority. These two extremes are not where Australia should be. We should be in a place that turns around and recognises that these are the extremes, that these are what is not appropriate. That in the same way there are punishments for other people who would protest in such an ugly fashion or say ugly things about other minorities, it should apply in this scenario. But of course it doesn't. And to be honest, I have no idea why. Quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. We'll keep debating for the rest of the night. Looking forward to it. Tell me who you think the winner and loser of the week is. Send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. We'll get into it with, among others, the great Graham Richardson next. What does he think about the suggestions? Albo could be a one-term government. I think you'll disagree, but he was right on the voice. Has he got some advice for his mate Albo? How's this for a dream team tonight? I haven't had Gary Hardgrave on the show for way too long. Of course, the former Howard Government Minister, my colleague here at Sky News. Lovely to see you, great man. And they don't get better than the wonderful Graham Richardson, life member in oh so many things. And when there's a Sky News Hall of Fame, he'll be one of the first entrants. How are you, great man? Lovely to see you. Sophie Ellsworth writes for media and so much more at the Australian newspaper, and she joins me in the Tower of Talk here in Melbourne. Lovely to see you, Soph.
You too, Paul.
All right, let's talk about what I mentioned a couple of things at the start of the show. We really have hit a somewhat new rhetorical low when the Labor Party is out there saying that their political opponent, in this case Peter Dutton, is a protector of pedophiles. This is a bloke who, of course, was a police officer, was part of national security. But more importantly, what happened to kinder and gentler politics?
Paul, you made some really good points in your editorial about this, but I think when politicians start talking like this, the Australian public just sees straight through that.
Correct.
Who honestly, seriously thinks Peter Dutton would be protecting pedophiles? It's just absurd. I think it's showing that the Labor Party is getting pretty desperate when they're throwing cheap shots like that.
Well, in fairness, I remember how, you know, as somebody that was in the fight and cheering things on, you know, when Richard Marles was referred to as the Manchurian candidate by Scott Morrison, I was like, oh, ha, ha, big hit. But then once you actually sit back and you have a look, it's a pretty desperate swing, right, to turn around and say something that big when there's clearly not the proof of it. Now, the Labor Party might be able to convince itself over drinks this weekend, Richo, that, oh, well, technically, if you think this and you think that, but it is overreach, and it's gross overreach, and if people are half paying attention, they will see that it is overreach. You match that with their political fortunes at the moment, it looks desperate. They're only halfway through their first term in office. Why do they look so desperate?
Well, I think you have your bad days, and we've had one. I think I'll run up a white flag on this. It was a shocker.
Good man.
But it only, it's not as if it happens every day. You've got to have a bad day every now and again. It makes the good days even better.
That's true. But Gary, again, people that are watching along, right? Now in a second we'll talk about, the realistic nature of the one-term conversation. Yeah. I'm not there. I would love to get there, and we all know why I'd love to get there, but I'm not there yet. I think we're talking about minority government at the next election, but the next election now, best part of 18 months away. But Gary, this is such desperate stuff. It is such overreach to be this personal. I mean, it's the equivalent of the rhetorical bomb going off. But again, kinder, gentler politics. And they even tried to have a go at Dutton for not getting the memo about kinder, gentler politics. Well, all that's out the window.
Yeah, and you would have thought after Ray Martin almost single-handedly delivered the no vote in the referendum by calling anyone who voted no a dinosaur or a D-head, you'd have thought maybe they might have adjusted themselves a little bit before they opened their yap on this. Look, Peter Dutton obviously is living rent-free in their head. Dutton is a fine person, and everything that's been said about Dutton's commitment to dealing with pedophiles, the way he's dealt with that child exploitation, the creation of that terrific mechanism, it was on him. He is so passionate about this stuff, and I've known the bloke for over 30 years. So let him keep throwing the mud. Maybe some of it will stick, but I don't think it will. I don't think it will at all, and people will see through it, Paul.
Yeah, look, I think the whole sort of strategy that, when in doubt, blame Dutton. Again, they are trying to rerun the 2022 election over again. And as we know, Richo, the reality is that you can't run the next election on the way you fought the last one. Elections are a moment in time, but they're also, when they're quite definitive and they're able to produce a winner and a loser, there's a great release of breath, and then we restart again. So would you caution Albo and his team about trying to put Dutton in the Morrison box? And I say that as a person who, like you, is quite a friend of Scott Morrison's.
Yeah, I think that going after Dutton in this way is not very smart. I don't think people like it. I think people do like a kinder, gentler form of politics. And once you start roughing it up, I think they turn off you. So if I was Albo and the team, I'd forget about roughing Dutton up and get back to basics.
Yeah, well, because it was really interesting, Soph, again, the polling that was around this week, the Redbridge people who, frankly, they advise the Teals, right? They're very left-leaning. But they're talking about how this side of Christmas, maybe just after Christmas, but the sense of competency and incompetency in this case around the government could set in at a level where it's going to be unable to turn back. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But again, linking back to, and we all know that most of the people who talk about politics are sort of going to be left-leaning, certainly the Canberra-based people. Where we've got a scenario here again, when to get a vote through the Senate, they'll take anyone's vote. And in this case, David Van, a bloke who was booted out of the Liberal Party, who, of course, in my view, has made a disgraceful decision when it comes to Murray-Darling. He's going to screw his own farmers out here in Victoria. But more importantly, it's interesting where Lydia Thorpe, and like a broken clock, they can be right twice a day. She's right on this. There's currently a series of allegations being dealt with by the Parliament about an interaction with another politician. These are the people that said, we're going to walk the walk, be a different type of politics. Well, in the end, they're just as dirty as everyone else, and it's all about the low road to the high office.
Well, I think it is, Paul. People, again, can see through this spin. They're saying one thing but doing another. Now, let's be clear here. These are allegations at this point. Of course. So we don't actually...
And he has denied them.
Exactly. So we know that that's the situation. But I think it's pretty hypocritical when the Labor Party's saying, we're all pro-women and all for equal rights and safe workplaces. I mean, you saw the treatment that Kimberly Kitchen experienced before her death and was so shocking. And I think the Labor Party was shown then to be hypocrites, and I think they're showing... I think Lydia Thorpe actually has a point here, as you said.
But also, Gary, we can't pick and choose what we think people pay attention to. But I've got to say, in the types of things that end up seeping into the barbecue conversation, and yes, we're very close to the pivot point that as soon as the calendar flips over tomorrow and there's a D, we all start to look somewhere else. But the people who are sort of half interested in politics, they can pick this stuff up. When you see the front page of the paper at a service station, when you brush past a headline online, you start to see this stuff and you go, hang on, there's something a bit weird here. How is their idea so dodgy that they need to go to this bloke to get a vote?
Well, look, you just got to trust the mob. Graham Richardson says it, John Howard says it. I mean, people who might have a bit of understanding about the Australian people say it every time, and people do see through it, Paul. I mean, what people are saying right now is they desperately want someone who doesn't just simply want to look at the next second in politics, the next moment in politics, and politicians will always politician, okay? So it's all about the numbers. I get all of that. So does Rich, I'm sure. But in the end, they want not just the plan for the next election, they want the plan for the next generation right now. And, Paul, it is completely absent, save for Peter Dutton bringing in the nuclear debate. It's really absent from public discussion. It's just this nasty kind of, we'll eat yours if you eat ours, we'll eat our own if we have to get into office. And I think people are over it. And I spent 11 years, 267 days as a Member of Parliament. It's an achievement that I will always cherish. 5.25 years as a Minister. But there's no way on earth I want to go back into that cesspit. It's a different and a far from kinder environment in Canberra. It's ugly and people know it. And frankly, they're just going to tune out. The more politicians politician, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, back to politics in a second, but Richard, I'm keen to get your view on this, which is that, as I tried to do my best at the start of the show, that just a couple of years ago we saw how the state went too far, but now before our own eyes we're seeing how they're not willing to go far enough in actually dealing with the people who are actively going after an ethnic minority, right? Now again, Marine Faruqi, no price to pay, standing next to that sign that, of course, said, clean the world, clean the world up, throw the Jews in the bin. Now, if that had been about a sexuality, what would the reaction have been? What would the reaction be if it had been about another ethnic minority? We all know what would happen. But again, perfect example here is a bunch of teachers. The teachers' unions are quite radical. It's a frightening insight into the way, of course, that they not just run their own politics, but how they're running politics in our classrooms. And they want to start to take that politics around the issues to do with the Middle East. And unsurprisingly, everyone on all sides of politics says it should be kept out of the classroom. Roll the tape.
This week, the Teachers Federation encouraged teachers to defy the Education Department's Code of Conduct by wearing the Palestinian keffiyeh and even taking protest signs into the classrooms. What action will you take to stop the Teachers Federation from encouraging the Code of Conduct breach and the politicization of our classrooms?
I'm very disappointed with the Teachers Federation in this instance. I've made that very clear. We do not want classrooms to be places where political activity takes place. That is not what schools are there for. We cannot have any actions that provoke unrest, discomfort, or make other students or other teachers feel unsafe or unwelcome. That has no place in any schools, and when it comes to my responsibility in public schools, it is not appropriate to make a child feel uncomfortable or unwelcome, or another member of staff, for instance. I have made my expectation very clear about the Code of Conduct, and that people will be dealt with in accordance with the Code of Conduct if they breach that.
Just by the by, I think that both Kelly Sloan and Prukar one day will lead their parties. That will be a preview of the 2030-something state election. But in the meantime, Richo, there have been everyone from the police to the politicians to the government to the bureaucrats that have proven to be impotent here when they say certain behaviours are not allowable, but then no sanction happens when people break the rules.
Yeah, I think, first off, you're right about Prukar. She will lead. I think she's a very, very promising person for us. So more power to her arm. She's terrific. But on the issue here, I mean, look, we go around. I don't know how many times we've debated this, Paul, but I think it must be in the hundreds. This is just one of those things that just keeps coming around, and never gets any better. It just keeps going, and that disappoints me a bit. I mean, I'm not sure where we go from here.
Yeah, because I think my issue, Gary, is that, again, the state has shown us, every authority and organisation, they've all shown us that when they don't like when you cross the line, they have a way to go after you. Now, either we don't go after anyone, or let's actually apply the same standards to everyone.
Yeah, Paul, people are giving up on education, public education in particular, which is sad. I'm a product of the state school system here in Queensland, and I'm proud of that. But you know, some teachers are really grappling with all of this. I mean, the classrooms have been a place where kids have been told what to learn, not how to learn, and they've been indoctrinated now for a generation, sadly. Things that we used to learn, I reflected upon this the other day, actually with Rowan Dean while we were travelling together. You know, that in 1971 at Runcorn Primary School, I was told all about the balance of nature. I got the old workbook still with it in there. Apparently, chlorophyll is formed when the trees suck all the carbon out of the atmosphere overnight and produce oxygen. So I sort of asked Rowan, I said, so what's happened? What's happened to that? Is the balance of nature now completely beggared? And you know, the simple reality is kids are not being taught history. I mean, we've now got the 200th anniversary of John Oxley floating down the Brisbane River 200 years ago, 1823. No one wants to celebrate it here in Queensland because they might upset somebody. And yet kids aren't even hearing about this stuff in the classroom. He was finding 3 convicts who escaped from New South Wales and came up here and hid in the Brisbane River. And Oxley said, I think I might build a settlement here in Brisbane. How prophetic was that? We don't get taught that in schools anymore. So, Paul, we have a real problem in our education system. Prue Carr, I think, is terrific. So I've probably just killed her political chances. But she is very good. There's no doubt about it, very personable. But I hope that she can deliver on this. But the New South Wales Teachers Federation runs New South Wales, and they'll tell Prue Carr what the rules are, not Prue Carr telling them. That's the reality, and it's a wrong reality.
And Oxley was the first of many people who, when given the chance, moved out of Victoria, moved out of New South Wales and moved to Queensland. I look forward to doing so at one point in my life. Gold Coast retiree in training. Save me that spot at Southport. Save me that sport. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be great. You know, Southport Sharks, it's an AFL team, but still, Richo and I, we back them in. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live, here in the Tower Talk in Melbourne. Glad you're watching us tonight. Look, there's a lot of news around about some bloke who's written a book, yet another one about the royal family, Harry and Meghan, all the rest of it. Can I tell you? I've read it. And it's garbage. But I'm turning it into a little bit of entertainment for you because tomorrow, Rita Panahy's show here on Sky News, you will see Rita and I reading extracts and giving a little bit of psychoanalysis at Bar Bambi here in Melbourne. That's why we're down here. Full version will come up soon at skynews.com.au. So if, like me, you cannot stand this endless Harry and Meghan garbage, a chat about that book about to launch on skynews.com.au. I am, of course, here with Sophie Ellsworth, media writer for The Australian. Here's your copy if you would like to read it. None other than Graham Richardson, of course, the Labor legend joining us from Sydney, and in Brisbane is none other than the wonderful Gary Hardgrave. Now, Richo, I noticed that there was a Sydney businessman. He went through the ICAC process. The ICAC process screwed him over. He decided to go off to the UN, and the UN has backed him over ICAC. This is a ripper.
It is indeed. He's a good fella too. I know him quite well. And he really was treated disgracefully, which, he's not the first or the last from ICAC who's been treated like that. But most of them cop it. He fought back. He just said, no, I will not cop my good name being besmirched. I'll go after them. And he's done so and won, so good luck to him.
Yeah, Sharif Khazal, I think is his name. It was all in relation to things back in 2011, public inquiry about relationships, all the rest of it. Never charged, not enough evidence, none of that stuff with the public prosecution. Yet, of course, his reputation in the bin. Well, he's gone, bugger it, I'm going off to the way this thing works. And the UN's decided to slap it down. Good to see. All right. Now, Gary, you've been around politics and, of course, in the Howard government in particular. You saw the dice with death that was, putting the very big idea on the table in 1998, which was the GST. Now, John Howard had quite a big backbench and he burnt an awful lot of it. Kim Beazley won the popular vote. In 2007, Kevin Rudd had quite a big backbench, about 90 seats. Of course, most of that burned, in fact, all of that, burnt by Gillard minority government in 2010. Of course, 90 seats, Tony Abbott in 2013, blown away by the ghost and barely returning to power in 2016. Are we noticing a pattern here about what happens after the first election? Well, of course, Albo does not have a backbench in the 90s or the 80s. He is barely in power in a majority. He's a few seats clear, but If the polling is the way it currently goes, he now falls to the low 60s, meaning he's got to go shopping off to places like the Greens. But the one-term talk of Albanese as a majority or a government at all, where do you start to see the future of the greatest Prime Minister of all time?
Well, look, 18 months to go. A lot of things can go incredibly wrong. This is a government, though, that seems incredibly lost. And I would have thought, because Albo was elected the same day as me, 2nd of March 1996, so, we came into Parliament together, and it surprised everybody when he became Prime Minister. Good luck to him. But he's like he's caught the parked car. He's the dog that's chased it and he's caught it. Doesn't know what to do. Can't put a key in, can't start it, doesn't even know how to open the doors. And unless somebody's pointing him on a jet, he doesn't seem to have any sort of spring in his step. People desperately want leadership, Paul, and it's like one of those old tiki tour things they used to do in Europe years ago where someone was holding up a clipboard saying, follow me, this is the way to go. This bloke is running the Lost Patrol. And between him, Chris Bowen, who is destroying Australian industry, destroying family businesses, destroying families and their economies because of this crazy, wrenching move to try and turn everything green when it comes to energy, and ignoring the big, beautiful deposits of black stuff in the ground a few hundred kilometres here from the Sky News Centre here in Brisbane. We've got coal that we can burn, which we could provide cheap power with. And, Paul, until we get cheap electricity, we're not going to make stuff anymore. Hey, I actually surprise young people by saying, we used to make cars. Like yesterday, it was the anniversary of the first Holden coming off the mass production line in 1948. Ben Shipley was there. I mean, that was back in the day when we actually did stuff in this country. You can't afford to do this anymore. Chris Bowen will be on the epitaph of why this government dies. He will be front and centre. Tony Burke won't be far behind him. Tanya Plibersek will be on the list as well. And what's her name? Linda Burney. If she's still there in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be surprised. She'll be there as well. So, Paul, it's a government that's showing death throes. It really is. Really is, at our expense.
Don't forget a bit of clueless Claire O'Neill. Now, Richo, I know you may disagree, no doubt, everything you've just heard. But let's get to winners and losers. Yeah, just a squidge. So assume all of that is the case. Let's get to winners and losers of the week. Sophie Ellsworth, who stands out for you as just the big yay or the bugger off this week?
Okay, the big yay, I have to say Neil Mitchell, who hangs up from his morning show tomorrow after more than 30 years. Yep. Incredible career. The big down is Omid Scobie. I mean, I can't wait to read this, but from what I've read, it looks like a train wreck.
There is a lot of scoffing and eye rolling to be done. I look forward to hearing it when I'm back home. Richo, your winner or loser, mate?
Well, my winner will surprise you. David Cameron in the United Kingdom. What a comeback. It just doesn't happen.
Yes.
But he did it. So I'll doffs me lid to that one. That's for sure. Loser? Well, I don't know. There's a few of them around. But I'll run with Putin, who's now, I think, finally looking like the world is catching up with him. Finally looks to me like that bastard might be on his last legs.
All right, well, fingers crossed. All right, Gary, make it super fast, mate. I'm already over time.
Yeah, no, Peter Dutton, he is living it rent-free in the government's head. He's the winner. And the loser are the radical Greens. I mean, anybody that's doing what they're doing and supporting the people they're supporting are big losers and hurting Australia every day.
Thank you, gang. Do appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend. Quick break, back with more about 4 minutes. Right on the button to the late debate. Seriously, thank you so much for watching this week, especially the good people in regional Australia. You've been very kind to us wherever you happen to be. Thank you for your loyalty to Sky News. Keep it going. And always send us emails at skynews.com.au. But if you'd like to join us for Port Lincoln, Our Town, not this, but next Sunday, send me an email tonight, ourtown@skynews.com.au. Go Tigers, go Yankees. See you Sunday.